What's up, everyone? This is Dariusz Kalbarczyk, co-founder of MG Poland, JS Poland, AngularMaster.dev, and WorkshopFest.dev. Welcome back to JavaScript Master Podcast. Today, we've got a special guest from London, UK, a principal serverless specialist, solution architect at AWS Cloud, international speaker, OReilly Author. Ladies and gentlemen, Luca Mezzalira. Hi, Luca. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. Yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So, please introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
Sure. My name is Luca Mezzalira. I'm a principal specialist architect on serverless. I'm working for AWS. And I'm based in London. Nowadays is 10 years that I'm living in London after spending 29 in Italy. So far it's a great experience, to be honest, living abroad in this fantastic city. So I have 18 years of experience in the industry. I started as front-end developer. I created my own company and moved to London, and I did, let's say, many type of jobs from tech leader to VP of architecture, and now I'm here in AWS. In AWS, I started a year and a half ago, and I started in the media entertainment team. And just recently, at the beginning of this month, early July, I became a serverless specialist. It's, let's say, very intense, as you can imagine, but I really like it because you have a lot of possibilities to touch different things and expand your horizons. Apart from that, because I'm a self-taught, in my spare time, when I have some, between family and work, I tend to create content for developers and for architects. I have my own newsletter that's called Dear Architects, where every week I select 5 content that I really like reading, and then I share inside this newsletter, providing a bit of angle why I thought that it was interesting. I wrote a couple of books. I took several conferences worldwide, and I create content internally for AWS or externally for people. I tend to be quite active on social, trying to share some interesting articles, especially nowadays on serverless, obviously. That my colleagues have written. So if you are interested on the topic, feel free to follow me, and every day, more or less, you're going to see new articles or new ideas on how to solve specific problems. But the part that I love the most is giving back to the community, because I grew up back in the days with this strong community focus, where when socials weren't there and we were using forums in Italy. I grew up basically asking questions, people reply, and that never left me. So I'm still doing that, and I will continue doing that for the rest of my career. So don't worry, I won't leave you alone for long.
What exactly does a specialist solution architect do at AWS Cloud? How does your day look like?
Yeah, we don't have like a standard work day. Every day is different. And that's the part that I love the most from my job, because someday you are more focused on, let's say, talking with customers. Maybe you have an event that is happening. Sometimes you need to study or go more in deep about the specific topic because you have to prepare for a conference or for talking with a customer. Some days you need to create a demo based on the feedback that you receive from customers, or also what we find in socials. So if we found that there are a lot of people struggling with a specific topic, we tend to understand if we already have some content available or we need to generate that. So what we are trying to do is basically gathering signals from the field and trying to give back to the field, providing solutions that are working. Obviously, it's not always easy because there are a lot of customers are using serverless in AWS. and there are many of us, but we are not enough, at least. And it's great, to be honest, having this exposure on different things, from public speaking to writing to studying. The possibilities that are available for us in AWS are endless. And the fact that is not very strict on the way how you are working allows you to also explore part of the technology or part of yourself that maybe you didn't know before.
Now let's go back a few years. So when did you start your adventure in programming?
Oh, nice. So it was 2003. I was 17, and I left school back in the days, and I was working in a warehouse, and in the evening I was studying programming. What happened, I became extremely passionate about Flash. That was back in the days a real big thing, and I started to build for fun, honestly, a bunch of websites just to test things that I was studying. Every night I was basically reading a chapter of a book and apply the learnings, and trying then to re-elaborate and make them more tied to what I have in mind. And at the beginning was tough, because obviously working in a warehouse and in the evening doing that, it was challenging. But luckily, after a couple of years, a company in my hometown in Italy saw the website that I created and published, and they asked me to join the company. So in 2004, 2005, I started to work on that. Now, in this company, I stand there for 8. And then I decided to go freelancing by my own, and it was a good decision, because at the end I started to be exposed to different challenges compared to what I had in that web agency. And I started to work all over Italy, and I started to join a community back in the days. It was Flash MX 2004, and then ActionScript.it. And it was a great start. Obviously, there was a lot that I had to learn, and still I have a lot to learn. But back in the days was great, and there I started my career basically studying in the evening and continuing to study in the evening also when I was working, and working during the day. And there basically it was just trying one project after another at the beginning in my area, and then I started to expand in Italy. I created my own company. I arrived to have roughly 12 employees plus many contractors, and then at some point I decided to sell my company after working for several years in Italy, to try this experience in London. So I moved to London in 2013, and there basically I had the possibility to be first lead developer, then tech lead, and then having impact in large organizations in different industries. Probably the let's say most important experience that I had here in London was in my previous company called The Zone, that is a streaming platform for live sport that is available globally. And there I started as system architect, and then I became VP of architecture after a few years. The beauty there is that the front-end part was extremely challenging, because you don't have only web application or mobile, but you have a lot of set-top boxes, console, and TV devices. And obviously in low-end devices, the way how you develop is completely different from what you do on web application, because every byte matter. Luckily for me, when I was in Italy, I worked a lot on embedded system with Flash, and yes, Flash was running on embedded system, despite everyone was saying that it is slow. I was able to put in Flash and Flex actually inside a motorbike, and replace the dashboard, mechanical dashboard, into digital one in 2009. So it's totally doable, and it was let's say a great experience for me, learning all the tricks on how to work on low-end devices. And I think that kind of challenges made me a better developer. And basically, yes, that is what I have done in the last 18 years. So obviously, in the meanwhile, between jobs, I deliver a lot of talks. I count over 250 at the moment worldwide. I was able to travel around the world, coming to Poland several times, thanks to you, and being able to learn from others and provide what I've learned on my side, trying always to give an angle that can add value to the people and with some giveaways and action points that I can have at the end of my talks.
Great story, great path. Why microfrontends are the answer for today's increasingly complex web applications?
Microfrontends, I think, are one of the solutions. One thing that I like to highlight is that is one of the many solutions we have on frontend. I don't want to say are a silver bullet, and I don't want to say that are a solution that everyone should embrace. But there are one thing that I realized when I started to work in this project in my previous company. Is that if you want to scale the backend, we had consolidated patterns like microservices, and there were different distributed system architecture like cell-based architecture or space architecture, whatever. But now on the front end, we didn't have. We just have like patterns on the code side. And then when I found myself in a situation where I had to scale the company, because I was the second tech person hiring that startup back in the days called The Zone, I realized that we had to change the game and make something different, because we cannot move from 2 people to hundreds of people in a year time and start with an architecture that wouldn't allow us to scale and work at the speed that the company wanted to work. So my starting point was, okay, I need to scale the organization. The organization that was pre-pandemic, obviously. So we're talking about 2015. The organization has to be spread across Europe, and we need to have a way that they are working independently. And more I was thinking about that, and more I was also thinking, I don't think we have the capacity to coordinate people in different time zones working together in large projects for multiple devices in a meaningful manner. I was coming out from a project with 30 people that were co-located. We were struggling to have the throughput that the company wanted. So we ended up thinking, I ended up thinking, okay, we need something new. And my starting point was looking what kind of architecture patterns were available out there. And microservices obviously was crystal and clear, where tens of years that was there. It was, let's say, I would say successful when implemented correctly. So I started to take a step back and look at the principles behind microservices. So the fact that you can create independent teams, the fact that you can have a strong governance, the fact that you need to have a good automation process, because in reality, the code that you write is probably 20% of the whole microservice thing. The complexities around governance, the complexities around automation, logging, and scalability, and all infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So when I started to look at that, I was trying to carve out the key part that could be interesting for a front end part. So I just started to say, okay, so the concept of domain-driven design, where we take the bounded context and assign to a specific team, that resign very well, because we can create with that the independent team. We want to have independence, therefore we need to create, let's say, some guardrails that people can use as North Star to follow for developing this stuff. So all this reasoning allow me to start mapping basically the learnings from the backend world into the front end. And it was a long journey, and I think it's not finished yet, because there is more that is coming out in the next few months, and I think it's not going to end very soon. It's a iterative process that we need to learn. We need to understand what we are doing right, what we are doing wrong, and capitalize on these learnings and try to, let's say, improve. But when I started, at the beginning, there were some challenges because back in the days in 2015, it was end 2015, early 2016, you can imagine that when you were talking about this idea where the word Microfrontend wasn't yet common, people were calling about micro apps or in other ways. And you speak to many developers that were used to work with single page applications or site rendering, and you start to say, oh, we need to divide in this way. We need to create an independent team. They were looking to me like I was a weirdo because, as you can imagine, it wasn't common, and still people are skeptic about the thing. But the reality, it turned out several months later that the developers really enjoyed that process. Not all of them, obviously, that's fine. I didn't expect to have a full buy-in by everyone, but we were learning. I see progress. I started to see some great signals, like we were onboarding entire teams every other week of the month. And when they started to build up their Microfrontend and they hire another team member, the new team member can pick it up very quickly because the cognitive load for, instead of learning the entire system, but just covering one vertical, one portion of the system, was definitely lower. And therefore, the entry barrier for a developer was new to that. It was meaningless. Just started to understand the stack, maybe was already familiar with React or whatever other technology we were using, and they start to contribute the second week. The challenge, though, that they started to came up was, okay, we achieved this independence, but we didn't think at the beginning about the, let's say, how cross-pollinate all the other teams. Because now you have like several teams, tens of teams spread in Europe that are working independently. Great, good achievement. But we struggle at the beginning for creating that moment of communication across teams. So then we started to integrate more governance. We started to add to speak with the engineering manager and the head of engineering and say, listen, we need to create certain moments where the front-end developers can work together. And then we started to apply, community of practices or town halls for sharing and find a way to office hours even for doing so. And then we also thought to add asynchronous communication like requests for comments or architectural decision record and stuff like that. As you can see here, for the last few minutes, I spoke mainly on organizational problems because in reality, distributed systems are solving those challenges. And that's why I'm saying Microfrontends or distributed system in general are not a solution for everyone. But when you are in a situation where you have, I would say, let's say more than 5 teams working together on the same project, maybe looking into Microfrontends or distributed system might be beneficial. And again, the challenge there, and I see in the last 6-7 years, often people are thinking, oh yeah, but it's very difficult because I need to coordinate all this part together. The reality is often front-end developers, when they start, they realize that Microfrontends are powerful, but they tend to map Microfrontends into components that are remotely loaded. And that's where the problem lies, because we often think, oh, a Microfrontend is a component that I load remotely, but it's not true. The main problem is that we are not looking properly around the domain-driven design concept for dividing your bounded context. And I'm saying that because very often I was dragging discussion like, oh yes, we have this component, this Microfrontend, that Microfrontend, and every time I need to speak with the other teams for coordinating how I can share this, how I can do that, and suddenly I spent the first few years that I struggled really to find to unwind the reason that was clear in my mind and share with developers. I think now in the last couple of years, I was able to articulate very, very well the difference. And I think it's around the domain knowledge that the component has. Because the component, vast majority of the time, has a bunch of functionalities, but the real way how the component render inside the DOM is orchestrated by the container of the component. So the domain logic is not owned by the component, but is owned by the container of the component. In Microfrontend, it's the opposite. The Microfrontend own the entire business logic, and the container just provides some environment variables, let's call it that way, or properties that you provide in somehow. It could be by injection, it could be appending to the window object. I've seen different ways. But that creates the independence of a Microfrontend. So a Microfrontend is not too granular, because too granular means that you are going to create a distributed let's say mess where you have to coordinate across multiple teams. You need to find the right balance, and unfortunately there isn't a way to say, 20 lines of code is more or is a component and 50 lines of code is a Microfrontend. There isn't this thing. It's based on your project that you need to find the right balance and iterate on that. Don't stop to review what you have done and the decision you have made for finding these balance that allows you to have independent teams working together in the same project.
You are author of two very interesting books. First, published in 2018, Front-End Reactive Architectures, and the latest, Building Micro-Frontend, Scaling Teams and Projects, Empowering Developers. Can we go through some of the topics from your last book? I would like to give our listeners an idea of what exactly they can expect.
One thing that I also written in at the beginning of the book, for explaining what you will find in the book, is that the focus of that book is not on teaching how to write in Angular or in Vue or in React a Microfrontend. The focus of the book is allowing you to have the mental model for building successful architecture in Microfrontends. Because so far, we often thought that as a front-end developer, we were designing architecture. In reality, all the framework and libraries that we were matching together, they were doing that for us. We were just implementing a specific architecture was designed for us. So when you use Angular, you have a bunch of, best practices and solutions that are already well thought by the team behind Angular. And you just start to say, okay, I use reactive programming here, or I use the injection there. And these kind of things is just the implementation part. With Microfrontends, instead, we don't have a framework. We need to take a step back and look into the mental models, our context, understanding deeply how we are doing things. And I think for me, that was the biggest leap that a front-end developer has to do when we are working with Microfrontends. If I ask a front-end developer to implement a portion of a view inside an HTML page, they will be able to, no matter what. The challenge, although, is around few key concepts, like how I compose Microfrontends, how I slice my Microfrontend and stuff like that. And that's where I focus the book. It compared to other books that are out there on Microfrontends that are more hands-on, where you literally take, let's say, their example. I prefer to avoid to do that and minimize that part. I've done an implementation of with Module Federation on the book using React that I think was useful for explaining certain concepts. And every framework has its own, let's say, key takeaway. But usually the framework have a very strong documentation. You don't need a book for understanding deeply how a framework works. You can just go to the framework book, for the framework website. But what in a book I want to find is the part that is missing in the documentation. So why certain decisions were made? What are the trade-offs that are making? And my book basically, after, let's say, so many years and having the possibility not only to implement on several devices, but also having the possibility to consult several organizations worldwide, since when I joined AWS, but also before, on starting this journey in Microfrontends, seeing the pattern that they were suggesting, the challenges they face, and how this pattern were solving those problems, make them successful. And I wanted to collect all of them into the book because I think that is the real value. That is avoiding to make mistakes because someone else have already done that, in this case myself, and know how to overcome them. And I thought that this, for me, was way more important than going deep and say, oh, you need to configure in Material UI this specific flag in order to achieve that. That is something that you can arrive to know, and also is something that is easy to pick it up in somehow. But you need to understand why you need to the flag, first of all. Then if you understand the why, for me, today is Material UI, in 6 months or a year will be another library, you will be able to apply because you understand why you need to do that. If I tell you, oh, just configuring this way Material UI, and if you don't take a step back and look into why do I need to do that? I will do that obviously because the book is saying that, but why do I need to do that? Then you lose yourself in the next framework or next version of the same framework, wherever it is. And what I learned in the hard way in my career is that what sticks really with you in a way that it will allow you to avoid, let's say, investment that is short term, is understanding what there is behind the programming language. Also, the other book that you mentioned, Reactive Programming, that was my way to explain that learning a programming paradigm, learning design patterns, learning architecture is not something that is changing every year. It's not something that's changing every 5 years. If you think about how many architectures are out there, we have tens of them since 70s. So it's 50 years in the industry that we have, I don't know, maximum 20 different architectures. And if you master them, then today is, I don't know, I remember the time when there was Flux that introduced the unidirectional data flow, and tomorrow will be MobX, and in 6 months will be something else. It doesn't matter because the concept is exactly the same. The syntax changes, but the concept, it will be there. So for me, what I want to achieve with that book is giving to the readers the possibility first to understand the why, understand the trade-off that they need to think, because often one of the thing that is very funny, the joke that we say between architects is we always answer, it depends. But it's not because we don't know. It's because the reality is there are too many forces that are contributing to a decision that are environmental sometimes. So it could be a context. It could be the knowledge of the people. It's not only black or white. It cannot be a straight answer very often, especially when you are talking about architecture, stuff like that. So I wanted inside the book to encapsulate all the reasoning, all the things that I have seen when I was talking with customers, when I'm talking with developers, and provide this wisdom in 300 pages, because I think that part is the difficult part. If you understand that part and you know what are the building blocks for creating a successful Microfrontend system, then the implementation is to a certain extent a detail, because you can derive that on your experience as front-end developers. But the experience on having the exposure worldwide, bringing a company from 9 countries to 200, is not something that everyone will have out of the box. It's something that is very precious, in my opinion, and therefore collecting all these learnings in these 300 pages, it was probably the best way for delivering the message around Microfrontends.
So your book helped to understand, helped to make a decision how to start with architecture, yeah?
Yes, exactly that. So I focus deeply on the architecture, covering every aspect, not only on the technical side. I talk about CI/CD. I talk about when to use monorepo and when to use multiple repo. That is a question that I had so many times in my talks, because often people are very religious on the technical side, but monorepo and multi-repo provides some, let's say, design practices that are outside the technical part. They are enforcing certain mechanisms into the teams that if we don't think about that, is not, when we select just a simple thing like I go monorepo, multi-repo, the way how you structure your teams, how the communication flows between teams changes. And often people don't think about that. And I wanted to highlight those things where, and that is not just the one, this is one of the many things that I highlighted in the book. I wanted to provide the possibility to say, this is how you slice the microfrontend. This is the way, the possibilities you have to compose. This is the way how you provide the APIs to your microfrontend. This is the way how you do authentication with microfrontend. And all the pain points that I have seen over and over and over again, but not only in one version saying this is the way, because there isn't one way for doing things. In modern architecture and even in development, when I hear, oh, this is the way to go, this is the way to go, maybe in your context, but it's not the way to go generally. There is so many things that nowadays you can say, oh, it's only with that specific library I can achieve that, because it's not like that anymore. And therefore, we need to change our mindset. And I wanted to provide these, list of things that you need to take care of when you're building microfrontends, and also provide some ideas on how to sell them into the company. I found myself in the position when I had to pitch the idea to the CTO. Oh, we need to invest on this new idea that, by the way, no one else is doing. It's just me that I'm thinking about that. And it was very tough. I spent like 4 months convincing him. And therefore, I provide all the learnings of what I have done, providing data points, why we were doing one thing, why we were doing it another way, providing a POC and so on and so forth. So I wanted to because I can understand that book can be read by a developer or from an architect or even a tech lead or a VP of engineering. So I wanted to give them the clarity that you can find from a person that went through the entire process end to end over and over in multiple industries and worldwide. That's why I designed in that way the book.
Perfect. So one of the topics you cover in the book is Micro-Frontends principles. So let's talk about that.
I believe that, we had to find some North Star for providing, the right solutions for developers to make the right decisions. And principles, I think, were key. It's like giving you a manifesto or a guideline where you say, when you don't know what to do, look at the principles. That was my intent. And I think that was a very successful idea, because I've seen people referring to them very often. The principles behind Microfrontends is definitely being independent. So you want to deploy them independently without coordination. That doesn't mean you will never, ever have to coordinate with other teams. Sometimes it might happen, but it should be an exception and not a day-to-day thing. Another one is that we design Microfrontend around business domain. And that for me was the way in my head to communicate that we need to think about Microfrontends in a different way from components. Components are a technical solution that are collecting a bunch of features. Microfrontend has to be seen from the user perspective. And that's why also in the book I discuss about that. I also discuss about the fact that you might have the same technology or multiple technologies with Microfrontends. Very often I heard companies that were optimizing for multi-framework. I'm a bit against that, because in reality, also in a single page application, you can have technically multiple frameworks. But would you do that? Probably not, because you know the performance will suck. And that's why in Microfrontends, usually I tend to say, try to use one. And there are certain situation where, you might need multiple frameworks. Maybe you are migrating from a legacy application to a new one, or you are updating your UI framework from, Angular 1 to the latest version of Angular, stuff like that. But that is a temporary thing, and it's fine, it's acceptable, because it's a good trade-off for de-risking the deployment of your system. But if you optimize for multi-framework, for me, is a mistake. Another principle is around avoid premature abstractions, where people usually, there was the most controversial thing that I said, that were like many people judging my words on that. Oh, if you are saying that you need to duplicate everything. That's not the case. The thing is, we need to think when to abstract, but very often developers start to abstract upfront. They start to say, okay, so this one will be available in this microfrontend, in that microfrontend, in that microfrontend. Let's make a library and we share it. The problem is we don't realize the cascading effect of that, because building a library easy. Maintaining a library and updating and creating the governance that allows every microfrontend to be updated is complicated. And therefore, sometimes you need to take the decision to wait a bit before deciding what to abstract and how. And that, for me, will save a lot of time, a lot of pain to developer teams, because we want to create independent teams. And the moment that you abstract, it means that you are creating external dependencies. And therefore, either you have a very strong governance model based on inner sourcing, or otherwise, and I didn't see many companies doing that, or otherwise you struggle because you have a team that has to take care about that, but now that team has to take care about a lot of things for multiple teams, and there, maybe if you need quickly to have a fix, you won't be able to have it, so you start to fork it or patch it, or even worse, and that will create a cascade effect that is definitely not pleasant. And last but not least, is one thing that still in 2022 I'm not seeing, is that the ownership for the front end for an end-to-end solution. Microfrontends, I think, considering that are slicing the problem in smaller chunks, allows you to take care not only on the development side and the testing phase, but also the CI/CD, that I believe is extremely important nowadays, that developers master that part, because they can decide how to heavily optimize their code base. In my previous company, we had some guardrails on creating that. So we provided a platform for doing the CI/CD. But the teams were responsible to decide which tool was the best for optimizing their code. And some teams decided to go with Webpack, some other teams were Rollup, and then they exchanged their learnings. They started to see an healthy discussion where, Rollup has this is out of the box, Webpack, I need to create that, stuff like that. And that was extremely valuable for a company and for developers themselves, because they started to learn deeper that part, and also the observability part that before we often didn't take care in the front end. Now we have multiple front end maybe inside the same view, and who is responsible for what when there is an S1 incident, who is responsible for that. So the fact that we have observability allows a team to immediately spot where is the problem and react to that, maybe even prevent that is too bad. And I think those are the key things that we need to take into account when we think about microfrontend.
So how to divide an existing application in microfrontends?
Oh, that's a great question. There isn't one solution for all of them, but what I can say usually is the starting point for me is looking at a couple of signals. The first one is how your user is consuming the application. One thing for me is very clear is that sometimes the organization is not, maybe set up for in the right way, and therefore the architecture and the project is struggling. And therefore, if you look how your users are interacting with your application, you have a better insight if you are structured correctly for serving them. In my opinion, usually is also looking from that and looking from the domain that composes a specific project. So maybe you have, authentication, you have, the catalog, you have customer support. So those macro area that you start very high level, and then you start to understand, okay, how complex is this macro level? It's very complex. Okay, I need to split it. And sometimes you don't realize at the beginning. You realize on the go, and then you need to adjust this thing. And that's absolutely fine, because there isn't any heuristic to say this domain is too granular or is too coarse grain. The thing is, we need to iterate, because business is changing, the way how our company is changing, new features are coming into the project. So we need to review certain decision every quarter, every 6 months, it doesn't matter. And therefore, for me, the starting point are those two. Starting from understanding how you structure your team and organization, starting on understanding how the users are interacting with the application and the domains of the application. Those 2-3 things are probably the starting point for understanding, okay, I need to slice that. And that will drive how you're going to slice. In my book, I say vertical and horizontal split, because I refer to a vertical split is one microfrontend load per time, and the horizontal split is multiple microfrontend that compose an entire page. And that is usually a reflection of the architectural characteristics and the findings of this initial part, these let's say, trying to understand how the domain works, how granular you need to be, how your team is structured. Those are not technical decisions. Those are organizational decisions, because how you slice your microfrontends is going to impact the communication flow, the organization structure, and potentially later on the performances. But as you can see, something tiny like I sliced that part of microfrontend can have a cascade effect in the entire organization. And that's why it's very important that we don't take into account only the technical part, but taking a step back and look holistically when we take a certain decision important like this, how is affecting the entire organization, how the communication. If I go, for instance, very granular with microfrontends, I might risk that I need to coordinate very often, and therefore you are losing the independency of those systems. If I go to coarse grain, maybe I have too much to handle for developers, that they maybe have a large backlog that will never be able to smash it. So as you can see, something as simple as I cut my micro frontend in this way has an immediate effect on backlog, throughput, organization structure, communication flow, and so on. And that's why we need to spend the right amount of time thinking on how to slice those micro frontends.
The next topic you cover is introduction to Microfrontends decisions framework. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, in the first few years when I was working with Microfrontends, I took several decisions. Some of them with gut feelings, some others with experience on the microservice part, and I felt terribly because when I was going around the world talking about Microfrontends, people were looking at me like, okay, I took this decision, fine. Sometimes they resign very well with them, sometimes they less. And then I remember I had like an epiphany during a workshop in Norway, and I was there like an hour and a half of talk. I was describing all the things, and I was describing at some point I said, okay, so there are literally 4 things that are clear now in my mind, and I was still talking, and my brain was thinking about that. So there are 4 things. So one is how I divide my microfrontends. So vertical, horizontal split. How I'm going to compose them. I'm doing it on the client side rendering, server side rendering, or edge side rendering. And then how I'm going to route them. So I'm going to route on the client side, at the edge, or server side. And the 4th one is the communication, how they're going to communicate between microfrontends. If they are independent, and somehow at some point they need to communicate. And there I basically wanted to stop the workshop immediately because I wanted to capture this idea. I couldn't, obviously. So when I finished the workshop, I just went to my room, hotel room, and to write down this stuff because I thought that was extremely powerful. If I was able to map those combinations in a sort of decisions tree, we were able to kick off a development of any project for Microfrontends very easily. When I started to describe that, I basically started to write, I published on Medium this idea, and it immediately was captured by the Microfrontends community. And then slowly but steady, I've seen, and still nowadays, people talking about vertical, horizontal split. When I do my engagement with customers, they already know this stuff. They already said, oh, we decided to go in this way, that way. And I saw how much impact that simple mental model provided to the community, because they started to talk in the way it was described there, and they started to take decision based on that. So I thought, it is a really great guidance, not for solving all the problems, but for solving the key ones, for creating the foundation. And when the foundation is nailed, you can cascade all the other decisions based on your foundation. And that achieve let's say, few years later, 3-4 years later, achieve exactly what I wanted to achieve with that thought, but I didn't expect that was picked up worldwide. And that for me is a testimony of really a lot of, let's say, thought and time spent thinking how I can simplify this, how I can make it digestible for people that they are starting with Microfrontends. And to be honest, it's one of the proudest things that they have done, because as you can imagine, having such an influence on something to a certain extent small, because when you read it, you don't think, oh, there isn't, let's say, much to think. It's like a page to read and that's it. But the effort for arriving there that took years, it was incredible. So I'm really, really happy that I was able to simplify, making very easy for everyone to pick it up. And for me, it was, let's say, it's a big reward.
A review of every possible approach for developing this architecture pattern. So what does it mean?
Yeah, so one thing that I have seen is that people were a bit loose into the framework thing. So the first thing that you do, I want to build Microfrontends, let's talk to the framework. And also recently on Twitter, I answered a few questions around which framework should I use. And the reality is that the framework is important, but I wanted to try in that chapter to explain it's always a trade-off. It depends what you're optimizing for. And that's why I spent on that chapter 4 months, because I had to review deeply all the architecture, understanding the trade-offs and so on. And that, let's say, took a lot of time. Some of them I knew better than others, but I have to say, what I wanted to pass is that you have 3 categories. You can have, and this relying on the decision framework. The first thing is that you have client-side rendering frameworks or tools like Module Federation, Single SPA. You can decide to compose Microfrontends on the edge. The problem of doing on the edge is the developer experience is not as great as you can have in client-side rendering or server-side rendering. And overall, there is another challenge that is data gravity, because data has gravity, and often people are thinking, oh yeah, but they do server-side rendering on the server side. The reality is at some point you need to render data. Where data are coming from, often they're not, or vast majority of the time I would say, they're not on the edge. So yes, you render on the edge, but unless it's very cacheable, your data, that usually is not, or is not for everything, then you're losing the benefit of being on the edge. And for more traditional server-side rendering in region with a strong caching strategy, that could be at several levels, might be better. And server-side is the other one. And I try to map inside these 3 categories all the possibilities that are out there for building Microfrontends. Nowadays, I think there are more frameworks that came out, hybrid that are covering multiple options. There are frameworks that I mentioned there that are evolving. And I think the part that I love the most is that people are starting to get back to the community on these things. They see the challenges. They started to accelerate the learnings for the whole community. So in that chapter, I wanted to provide the trade-offs of every framework, because if you understand your architecture characteristic, what your system needs to behave in production, then you can choose the right one. And very often, instead, I see the opposite direction. I see people say, "Oh, I'm using Webpack, and therefore I use Module Federation," but they don't even know if client-side rendering is what they are looking for, or if it's the best solution or the best architecture approach for the project.
So, what are the best practices for implementing microfrontends in a project?
Best practices. I think following the decision framework is definitely proof that it is working and is embraced worldwide by several organizations. So definitely it's a good starting point. The other thing is understand the difference between components and microfrontends. then invest on CI/CD and therefore in automation, and then iterate often on these parts, because it's not that you design something today and you will stick with that forever, because it's not a framework but it's an architecture. You cannot say, I designed today and I don't touch it for the next 5 years. In 5 years, things are changing. The business has changed, and maybe even the organization has changed and grow or smaller or whatever. Those things has to be, we need to take them into account, because without that, we won't be able to be successful on Microfrontends. And I believe those are the key things that I've seen often made it wrong, because people are thinking, I treat Microfrontends more or less in similar way, like when doing a single page application or a server-side rendering one. I share the state across Microfrontends, stuff like that. It's a problem, because distributed systems are different, and therefore we need to understand that we need to treat them in a different way. That's why my attempt in everything that I do is providing that we need to pay attention on those stuff. Recently, and last year, I used a lot my talk called Microfrontends Anti-Patterns, because I spoke a lot about why I think Microfrontends are great, but I need also to share the learnings of what didn't work. And I've seen that that anti-patterns that I collect in that talk is like the 80% of the time when I see problems with Microfrontends. And there I see, I think, usually that as a talk that I present very well with people, because they went through maybe and they made some of those mistakes. And so, yes, I did that. And I'm glad that at the end of the talks, there is often one or two people that are coming to me and say, I had exactly the problem that you described. I didn't know to solve it that way. And that for me is is great, because it means that really I nailed the problem to the bone, and that's great.
Can you highlight some of these anti-patterns?
Yes, sure. So the thing that I described before between Microfrontends and components is the first one that usually I describe. Another one is the communication between Microfrontends. So often people think that we should create a global state, but the global state between Microfrontends, you are just coupling them. It's what is called in microservices design time coupling. And every time that you change something in the state, you need to retest all the Microfrontends. It's very handy on the first development. It's very complicated to maintain in the long run. And the problem is often we forget that software is easy to build and we struggle with maintenance. And that is a given in our industry. And that is so usually what I suggest and recommend is trying to be loosely coupled. So use custom events, use event emitter. If you dispatch an event and no one is listening, nothing happened. You will have inconsistency in the UI, but you're not triggering an error. If someone a Microfrontend is expecting a number and receives a string and he doesn't have any validation on that, you are basically creating an error that basically blocks the entire system. So the reality is those are two of them, but another one could be when I see Microfrontends are calling two Microfrontends in the same view calling the same API. That is funny, because usually you don't think about the cascading effect that is happening on the API side. What does it mean when you have a million of requests from a view, and maybe now are 2 million that you need to handle because you have two Microfrontends making the same call, and maybe it's not cacheable. So those kind of things are the things that I have seen over and over again, and I try to map into that talk. What are the main challenges faced by teams developing microfrontends? I think often they are pretty good on the technical side. So implementing one framework or another one, that they know how to do that. They struggle with the governance part because we are not used to. As simple as that. So thinking about how I can make this feedback loop faster, how I can run my unit tests faster, how I can run my integration tests faster, how I can, when there is a change on a shared library, how should we enforce this change, or do we need to enforce this change? Or if there is an event that is bubbling from one microfrontend to another one, how I can communicate that there is a change of an event. So all those, let's say, cross-cutting concerns across teams are usually overlooked. And we need to instead not, let's say, take decision on everything up front, but definitely invest the right amount of time when they raise up, because that basically is the key for success on microfrontends.
Automation and fast feedback loop for developers. How can we achieve this?
With Microfrontends is to a certain extent easier, because if you think about that, you have a smaller portion of a smaller portion of code to test, and therefore your tests are usually faster to run than the entire single page application. The challenge, though, is we need really to look at our CI/CD to make it fast. Usually, one alarming thing for me when I was in my previous company is when a CI takes several minutes to run for a microfrontend, and that is a symptom that something is not working. And there is something fundamentally wrong with what we or either architectural or the implementation of the CI. It's a signal that something is not working. The feedback loop for me is fundamental, because the CI is not just a way for building repeatedly the same artifact. More importantly, is providing a feedback and confidence to developers. If we're capable to do that, great. And the other thing that I believe is extremely important for create this feedback loop and create confidence to developers in distributed systems is introducing the deployment strategies like canary releases and blue-green deployment that on backend is a normal thing nowadays. In the front end, they don't exist. Everyone would love them, but we don't have tools that allows us to do so.
So what is the impact of microfrontend inside an organization?
Usually, let's say, allows a team to be more independent and move to their own pace, because often, teams are composed by sometimes senior engineers, sometimes mix between senior, junior, and so on. So the fact that you are capable to, let's say, assign a specific domain to a team then allows you also to have this possibility to iterate at their own pace about specific thing, and also provides a way for refactoring and testing your stuff in production with more confidence, because what we are doing is allowing people not to redeploy the entire application, retesting the entire application, and so forth, but you just have a small portion. Therefore, the agility that provides a distributed system in general, front and back end, is usually this one. A lot of benefit on that one. The drawback, though, is that you need to automate more. You need to have clarity on governance. You need to have strong observability, because when there are issues, you need to understand immediately where the issue is, because you have a more modular approach.
Next question is how to porting a single page application to microfrontends.
Yeah, I think this one is following the pattern that I described before. So looking at, let's say, a domain inside a single page application, and then decide how to structure using the decision framework. And then the other thing that I usually recommend is when you have built one domain, trying to deploy that in production alongside the current application and apply what is called the Strangular Pattern for the redirecting, shifting the traffic between the single page application and the microfrontend. That allows you to test your assumptions, see if there are benefits, but more importantly for the team, they can go end to end from development to production and understanding how to maintain a microfrontend in production, and all the learnings that are in the middle in a way that is faster, provides immediate value for the company and for the users. That is the most important part. I think this approach usually is the one that works the best.
In the past 7 months, you worked with Zach Jackson, Module Federation, and Joel Denning, Single SPA, and Matteo Figus, open components to solve the MFE discoverability alongside the deployment method. Can you tell us something about this project?
Sure. Definitely, it's one thing that I had in mind towards the end of last year was looking at holistically at the Microfrontends challenges that we were facing, what in several of my engagement with customers I've seen that was missing. And the part that I believe we didn't have an answer that was common across frameworks was the deployment part. So how I can deploy with confidence my Microfrontend, leveraging canary release and blue-green deployment, leveraging dynamic import, because many people, when they were using a single SPA or module federation, they were baking up the URL, the entire URL of a Microfrontend in the configuration. Therefore, if they need to run in different in a multi-environment approach, they need to change the Webpack configuration. Do we have something better than that? And the answer, yes, we have. And the only thing that I built something like that in the past for my previous company, it was 2018. But I think we need to find a way that was across all the frameworks, all the implementation of Microfrontends should be there. And what we spent the last 7 months with those guys is understanding the problem space first, understanding what can we do, how it could work in these frameworks, how we can create a solution that would be embraced by the industry. So what we ended up is creating a JSON schema for Microfrontend, would be released publicly very soon. And the idea with the JSON is finding a lingua franca for everyone, for allowing the community to build on top of this JSON schema, as long as, maintaining the structure. You can create your own tools, your own UI that basically generate that schema. And on the other side, we needed to find a way to have the community embracing it. And that's why this working group with 3 of the, very important frameworks that are out there with Microfrontends. So we are going to have open components. We're going to have module federation, a single SPA, leveraging this schema. And that basically, in my opinion, is going to open up a bunch of opportunities for the community that they find themselves with something that is defined, and how, if you implement this schema and you provide the schema to your favorite framework, probably would be there. I know that there are other people interested on that. I spoke with Florian from Pyral. I spoke with Manfred, that I know is a big friend of this podcast and the Angular Poland community around implementing in Angular Architect. So there are some interest, and definitely I will work on to expand this. But the coolest thing for me is if we can provide a solution for something that is in reality a common problem for all the front end. It's not Microfrontends only, it's on Jamstack, it's on single page application, it's on server-side rendering. To provide a solution is strong enough to be picked up by everyone because it's a JSON schema, and use this JSON schema and tie it into what is the next the project that they're building, then I think we have a big win as a community, as an industry, because if we standardize that, it's done. So then we have a very strong argument that we can iterate faster. When we implemented in my previous company canary releases, and the developer could say, I want to deploy my Microfrontend for a new version for 5% of traffic only in this country, only for this browser. We move from a deployment every week or every 2 weeks in 25 deployments per day, because you have the possibility to test in production and make sure through observability that what you are deploying was rock solid. And I think this will change the agility of the organizations worldwide if we're capable to provide the things that the community is looking for. And I think this group of people will constantly iterate trying to figure out what is the best way for, based on the let's say, the feedback we are going to receive when we are going to announce this publicly. And my next talks will be around that, trying to explain why it's important, why it's doable to implement, and also providing some solution for this.
We will be able to see you at JS Poland conference in October. Please tell us what your speech will be about.
It will be exactly about this. So what I want to present is the journey that we have made for arriving at that JSON schema, how the JSON schema is structured. And despite it's simple, we spent, we met every 2 weeks since January till July, so 7 months. And we spent an amount of hours that is insane. We remove stuff, we add this stuff, we remove again. And it was a really valuable discussion, looking at from different angle and different perspective, the same problem. And I felt extremely lucky in all those hours spent with those guys, because I was able to learn a lot. I was able to, provide my point of view, validate it. Discussions were incredible. We really nailed, in my opinion, for the client-side rendering part, because I tried to be very prescriptive, have a small scope at the beginning, these possibilities and these capabilities, and we are going to continue to iterate for looking into server-side rendering and other things in the future. So I believe first we need to finalize this part, and then we will look into and start to build on top of this work, and then see how the community react. And based on that, we will start to take a direction. We are going to release soon the JSON schema on a GitHub repository, and that will allow people to look at it. There will be a bit of blurb that we created for documenting what our thoughts are. And then Matteo and I, that are working both in AWS, we would like to create a solution that will be open source, and you can deploy in your AWS account for applying canary release and blueprint deployment into your front end. And that's something we are going to start right after the summer break.
What's the future holds for Microfrontends?
I think there is still a lot to learn. I love the fact that many large organizations like PayPal, American Express, and many others are Netflix as well, are embracing Microfrontends. And therefore, that for me is it means that sooner rather than later, they are going to come with the groundbreaking tools and patterns and ideas for revolutionizing the Microfrontends world. I'm very excited about that. So there are a few things that I believe we need to spend more time around end-to-end testing. For instance, is still a problem in the terms that we have some solution, but it can be better. I think the developer experience is another thing that we can be better. The governance part, how we can simplify that with tools, the automation part. I think the automation, developer experience in general, and governance are the three areas that we need to look at. But first, I think concentrating on one pain point on the front-end world in general, Microfrontends or not, like the deployment, it will be a big win for the front-end community.
Okay, so I have two more questions. Your favorite technical and non-technical book?
Oh, I read many of them. I have to say, non-technical book, let's start with that one, is definitely The Spirit of Kaizen. Kaizen in Japanese means continuous improvement. And that was I usually say is my pivotal time for growing. That book changed completely the way I see my life. It's a very tiny one. It's 150 pages, if I remember well, 200 max. And it explains how with small but constant changes, you are capable to make big changes. And that for me really changed the way how I'm approaching code, I'm approaching my life, and is fantastic. I recommend to everyone, every time that someone is asking my favorite book that is not technical, I usually recommend that. The technical one, now there are so many that shaped me in somehow. There is a Foundation of Software Architecture, I think that I remember well, that is from Neil Ford and Mark Richards. Those two, for me, are my mentors, and I was lucky enough to meet them in person and work with them with OReilly. And Neil was also forwarding my book, and I was extremely lucky for that. Those two people are probably the most experienced architect I've met in my entire career. And they are absolutely great communicator. I hope that one day I will be able to have their capabilities, because obviously it's been a while that they're around in the industry. But how they change the way how architecture works and how they interpret modern architecture is fantastic. And that book, they basically capitalized 20, if not more, years of experience. And I think that is a must read for any developer or architect out there.
The last question. Best open source project you would like to recommend to our listeners?
Oh, God. Best open source project. I cannot say one because there are too many. I mean, I need to pick several of them because one is impossible. So let's start from end to end. So let's think about front end first. So I think there are great. So I really love Module Federation for the simplicity that Zach has taken into the solution. It abstracts a lot of complexity that often we don't see it in a very nice and polished way. And I think definitely is a tool that I recommend. I also love the work that was done by Joel for Singular SPA, because Singular SPA was quite pioneering. It's like 6 or 7 years that is out there, and it made really a huge impact in the Microfrontends community. On UI libraries, I would say that that is an interesting one. So I love the impact that React had in the community. However, I think later with the introduction of hooks and the way how they are to a certain extent coupling the behaviors with the UI, it's not something that I resign very well with me. I'm still decoupling the state and everything when I write my code, and try to keep the UI as simple as possible. So that part is one thing that is a drawback. I love Vue.js, how they implemented the code and APIs is so polished and so neat. It resonates extremely well with me, so I really love that part of Vue. I also love non-virtual DOM libraries. That is another thing that I'm advocating for a while. And there are the interesting part, in my opinion, is there are virtual DOM solved great problems back in the days, but nowadays I think there are more performant way to solve them. I think if you think about what eBay have done with Marco.js, it's incredible. And then apart from that, I think another cool one that I've seen recently is Quick. That is from the same person that created Angular, was part of Angular at the beginning. And the way how it does a resumable and the concept behind that is groundbreaking. It's very interesting. I really love talking with him, and I really recommend, if you didn't take a look, to look at Quick, how innovative is. On the backend side, I have to say Node Fastify. I think Matteo Collina did an amazing job for revamping the Node frameworks, and I was very lucky to pick it up early version of Fastify and see how Matteo evolved that. He's a fantastic guy, honestly, and I really love speaking with him. You always learn something new. Those I would say on JavaScript, front and back end.
Luca, thank you so much for participating in today's JavaScript Master Podcast episode. It was a great pleasure talking to you. See you at JS Poland 2022.
Thank you for inviting me, and see you at JS Poland. And if you're coming, feel free to pick my brain and stop me anytime. As Dariusz knows, I'm very approachable and I love speaking with people. So feel free to ping me also before the event, and we can have a chat. Thank you. Bye-bye.